karma is one of the hallmarks, I think, of the Buddhist view of the world, this idea of karma. And I want to discuss today a way in which we can understand karma to be a real phenomenon in the world, a particular understanding of reciprocity, of the way the world works, that makes sense of karma, I think, for us today. I'm Doug Smith of the Online Dharma Institute, that's onlinedharma.org. If you're new to this channel and interested in living a wiser and a kinder and a calmer life, consider subscribing to the channel and click the bell down below if you want to receive notifications when I come out with new videos like these. And one of the ways that I think we can live better lives is to understand the way that karma works for us. We may know that in ancient India, the idea of karma comes from sort of ancient Indian culture, this idea that what we do comes back to affect us at later times. If we act well, that will help us in the future, and if we act poorly, that will harm us in the future. This idea of karma is quite an ancient notion in India. It's wrapped up as well, or it became wrapped up over time with the idea of rebirth, this idea that karma then determines what our future lifetime may be like. And there are aspects of this karma belief that are, I think, less compatible with some of our contemporary notions, in particular rebirth itself, although it is traditionally believed to be true within traditional Buddhist and indeed in general Indian culture. And in general, I would say even religious culture generally, the idea that there is a future life, that somehow the character of that future life will be determined by the ethical nature of our actions within this life, that is a viewpoint that's held in religions around the world, and different religions of all kinds. But what I want to look at is a particular aspect of karma that I think we can make a lot of sense of, even with a more sort of contemporary mindset. That is to say, there's a way that we can think of karma as being true, as being absolutely true and understandable from a contemporary perspective. So what I'm going to do in this video is to first look at the early Buddhist notion of karma and how we can understand that usefully. And then I'm going to turn to some recent scientific ideas coming out of various ones of the sciences, and how they can also help reinforce this understanding that I suggest will help us understand karma. So, to begin with, the idea is that we live in a social culture. We live in a society, in a culture that is where we're surrounded by other people who pay attention to the character of our actions, the character of who we are, and who therefore respond given their understanding of who we are. That is to say that the benefits and problems that we have in life aren't all due to magic. They're due to, at least in part, in good part, due to the social structure in which we are located, shall we say. So, for example, when we talk about good karma, what does that mean? That means actions, that is to say actions that create good karma, are those that are based in our generosity, in our kindness, in our compassion towards others. Now, the Buddha said that, I should say almost famously said, that by karma, he says, by karma I mean intention. That is to say, for the Buddha, karma wasn't a feature of your actions so much as it was the feature of the intentions behind your actions. So, if you intended well, but perhaps did the wrong thing, that was still understood to be creating good karma for you because your intention was pure. Now, we might wonder how that could resolve itself in a social situation, given that we don't seem to be able to intuit somebody's intentions. We can't sort of read people's minds in that way. All that we see are their actions. However, I would argue that there is more to it. That, in fact, one thing that we often do is to try to intuit somebody's intentions. What do I mean? What I mean is that a lot of the way that we gauge people's actions around us is through an idea a concept, we might say, of sincerity of action. That is, we're always on the lookout for people around us. Are they acting out of sincere motives, or are they acting insincerely? And what do we mean by sincere in this particular circumstance? What we mean is, if somebody is doing something that's overtly generous, we want to know, are they sincerely generous? That is to say, is there an intention of generosity behind it, or is there an intention of greed that's being hidden here and expressed through generosity because they want something in return, perhaps? That's just one example. Or if somebody's being kind or compassionate, is that kindness or compassion, is that sincere or not? And there are many ways that I would submit that we use in daily life to try to figure these things out. We look at consistency. We look at the way that something is done. Is it done out of a sense of spontaneity, or does it appear to be spontaneous, or does it instead appear to be the sort of thing that's pressured? There are many, many ways, of course, in a social setting that we use to determine sincerity, but this is one of the ways that we look or try to find that, we might say, karmic root behind the actions of people around us. Now, we have to say that in this understanding, if we leave rebirth aside and don't pay attention to that and, leave that as, let's say, an open question, what we're left with is this idea that karma isn't necessarily completely effective, in the sense that we know that sometimes bad things happen to good people. That is to say, sometimes people may be acting out of completely sincere and pure motives and yet not necessarily receive the benefits to which we might say they're due. This does happen. And so what we have to say, therefore, is that if we're going to accept this notion of karma in a contemporary way, we're going to have to say that karma is simply probabilistic, we might say. It's something that increases our chances of gaining good results, but doesn't necessarily guarantee good results. If, on the other hand, we act out of what you might call impure intentions, that is, intentions of greed or of hatred or of ignorance, of delusion of some kind, if we act out of those impure kinds of intentions, then we expect there to be bad results for ourselves over time. And again, we may reflect that that's not necessarily the case, that sometimes good things happen to bad people. Indeed, we find it in the news from time to time, I would say. But again, we're talking about the general probabilities here. That in the main, society being as it is, greed, people acting out of greed are less likely to retain, let's say, good friends around them. They're going to tend to surround themselves with people also acting out of greed, who are going to be less true friends. People acting out of hatred, again, are kinds of people that are difficult to get to know well, difficult to spend time around. They're going to tend to attract around themselves people who are acting themselves out of hatred. They're going to tend to create in others enmity because they've acted out of hatred towards people around them, which is going to tend to provoke bad results as well. I think we know this. And so, as a result, we can say that there is this truth to karma, at least in the probabilistic sense, even if there's no guarantee. We might say skillful actions tend to produce beneficial results, whereas unskillful actions tend to produce harmful results. And by skillful, we mean actions based around generosity, kindness, compassion. By unskillful, we mean the opposite. Actions based around intentions of greed, of hatred, and of ignorance or delusion. And, that's part of what these words mean, skillful and unskillful, is that the skillful ones will tend to be better directed towards their ends of benefit. Benefit towards ourselves, benefit towards those around us. And this doesn't happen magically. For one, it happens because we're always acting within a social structure where we're surrounded by other people who pay attention to how we act and try to gauge our action based on these kinds of ethical considerations. Considerations of sincerity, for example. Now, there have been some advances, some ideas in the sciences that I think back up this general picture that I'm constructing here, that I'm trying to show about karma. In particular, there's some ideas out of evolutionary biology. Now, just a quick background of the history here. If we know a bit about evolutionary biology, we'll know that, well, evolution is a process which is extremely competitive, extremely, we might say, ego-centered, one of continual competition between various species and various individuals that are trying to compete for a limited amount of resources. This idea of nature red in tooth and claw, in Tennyson's phrase, very famous phrase, it seems like nature is a very difficult place because of the way that evolution must work. And this awareness led a number of biologists to a certain kind of conundrum, because they became aware, through their study again of biology, that in fact we find creatures, including humans, behaving in altruistic ways towards one another, behaving in what we might call ethical ways towards one another. And the question is, how can this altruism arise out of a soup of continual competition, fighting, and this kind of zero-sum game, at least it appears to be, from evolution? Where do we get altruism? Now, one simple idea is just that we're altruistic towards our family members because we share genes with them, and after all, genes are kind of the building blocks of evolution. But that didn't seem to be enough, because altruism, at least in humans and even in the non-human world, in the animal world, does seem to go outside of simply being an issue of family. And one recent evolutionary biologist, a man named Robert Trivers, suggested a different kind of view, which he termed reciprocal altruism. And here the idea is, well, it can be expressed in a phrase that I scratch your back and you scratch mine. That is to say, if any of us go around looking for people who want their backs scratched and scratch people's backs who want their backs scratched, we're liable to get our backs scratched as well in response. This kind of reciprocal altruism is something that helps everybody, that helps a large swath of people, or animals in fact. And in fact, this was found, this kind of behavior is found in the animal world, very famously in primates and rats even, and perhaps most famously and most interestingly in vampire bats. It also exists in what's called alarm calls among monkeys and certain birds. That is, a monkey or a bird will make an alarm call when they see a predator on the horizon. By giving the alarm call, they are calling attention to themselves, which is a form of altruism, because it makes themselves more apparent to the hunter, and so they may themselves be in greater danger by giving that alarm call. But if nobody gave the alarm call, then of course all of them would be in danger. So that's another way that this works. Now, one interesting feature of this idea of reciprocal altruism, and I'll again discuss a specific one in a moment, a specific example in a moment, one of the interesting features of this idea of reciprocal altruism is that animals that engage in it have to have some method of determining and keeping track of what we might call cheaters or free riders. That is to say, if we're going to be altruistic in a general sense, there's always the possibility of somebody who simply always wants their back scratched and is never willing to reciprocate. And in order to combat that possibility, animals have to be able to attend to the difference between people that or other animals that they interact with. They have to be able to say, okay, this one has been reciprocated. This animal has given me a back scratch in response, but that one hasn't. And this syndrome is perhaps, again, best exemplified in the case of vampire bats. Vampire bats are bats that live, I believe, in South America. In any event, they go around at night and gather blood from animals around them and take that back to their nest. And what happens is that not all of the bats are able to get a meal in a given day, but bats cannot survive long without food, only a couple of days. So they need to be able to share with other bats the food that they have retained over the evening. And scientists have studied these bats over a period of time and found this behavior of reciprocal altruism to be extremely well ingrained in this kind of bat society, if you like. They've found that bats are most likely to share food with others that have shared food with them. In one recent paper, a scientific paper, a couple of scientists remark, food received was the best predictor of food given across dyads, that is to say, across pairs of bats, and 8.5 times more important than relatedness. In other words, this isn't simply an example of bats sharing food with other family members, that is, other related bats. Instead, it's an issue of them simply sharing with other bats that have been willing to share with them. Now, this all gets a little bit in the weeds, but bear with me, I'll bring it back around to karma in a moment. Scientists who have looked at this kind of behavior among animals have tried to formulate it and formalize it in a form of what's called game theory, to understand what are the best sorts of behaviors, why do behaviors persist, which behaviors are most beneficial over time, over a period of time. And they've tried to model the kinds of behaviors that animals interact with each other with. And one of the things that's come out of these models is that one of the best, or perhaps the best, the best way that animals can behave with each other, the way that maximizes their own reproductive potential, we might say, over time, is a version of what's called tit for tat. That is to say, the best way these animals can play at this game of life is basically by entering the game, by being altruistic to the first bat that asks them for food, and then subsequent to that, by repeating back to the bat the exact same behavior the bat has given to them. That is to say, tit for tat. If a bat has been willing to share with them, then they're willing to share with the bat. On the other hand, if a bat isn't willing to share with them, then they don't share with the other bat. They simply mirror back the other person's behavior to them, or the other animal's behavior to them. That's tit for tat. This is a kind of, it's called an iterated tit for tat because it occurs over many, many days, weeks, months, years. The idea is that you're in a social structure with the same or anyway similar kinds of bats or animals involved, and so you can continue this game over a period of time. And again, the way that makes you happiest, that makes everybody the happiest, is this kind of tit for tat, where you repeat back to somebody the behavior that they have given to you. Now, why is this strategy of tit for tat so successful? Well, one of the reasons is that it manages to help out others who are altruistic, while at the same time punishing what we might call free riders or the cheaters out there who don't want to share what they have. So it does both. And I think we can see, if we consider it a little bit, that this game of tit for tat is pretty much a model of karma. The idea being that what you do to others, you're going to get back yourself. If you're altruistic to others, then others will be liable to be altruistic to you as well and help you out in a time of need. On the other hand, if you're want to be greedy and not share and keep everything for yourself, you're liable to be, therefore, among a group of people who will be greedy as well, that they're not going to want to share with you. And so you're going to be hurting at a time when you really need help. I think we can see then how these models out of evolutionary biology that we find that reflect what we find in the animal world are in fact an example of karma in action. Now, one of the things we'll probably notice as well is that none of this all is egoless. All of, certainly, evolutionary biology is based around a self, of retaining a self, of maximizing our potential over time, of maximizing our offspring and maximizing our lifespan and all the rest. Well, I shouldn't say lifespan, but reproductive lifespan anyway. That's the way it's understood in biology. But the same is true of karma. Karma is not a route to, we might say, perfect ethics. Karma is always going to be ego-based. And this is something that the Buddha himself realized and understood, that if we're caught in a world of karma, we're always going to be caught in that same world of trying to help ourselves, of trying to do things for the world that are also going to redound upon us in beneficial ways. So karma is not necessarily going to be the route to a perfect kind of ethics. And indeed, the whole idea of a perfected ethics is probably something that's not possible to achieve, at least in the ordinary world, because there are always going to be certain kinds of dilemmas. There are always going to be different ethical considerations that sometimes run up against each other. Now, interestingly, these kinds of dilemmas were not often discussed. In fact, I don't believe they were almost ever discussed in early Buddhism. They're the kinds of things that were kind of left aside and left to us to consider. And I did an earlier video on just that topic, on ethical dilemmas in early Buddhism, and I'll leave a link to it up here if you want to learn more. Thanks so much. If you're getting something out of these videos, please do check out my Patreon page. It's linked down below, and join us. Thanks so much, and we'll catch you on the next one.